Let's explore some more advanced CSS techniques that are going to really help us bring out the best in some of our elements in our web pages. Now, in order to do this demonstration, and let me change the title here, I've just created a simple div, and I'm going to create again an internal style sheet. And I did mention, and I will mention it again, we always want to create external style sheets, but for demonstration purposes I'm going to create my style sheet internal so you can see the styles and the markup on the same page. So I'm just going to give that div a width, a height, and a background color. And I'm going to save this as, create a new folder, I'll call it CSS3 index.html. Okay, if I preview this in the browser, I have something that looks like this, just a big blue square. Now, it used to be that before some of the later, more advanced CSS techniques, if I wanted to give something rounded corners, it was a very complicated process of saving an image with rounded corners and transparency, etc., and setting that as a background for that div. Now, fortunately, we don't have to do that. We have a very simple way of saying rounded corners with the border radius property. So border radius, I'll express the radius in pixels, and it results in the following. Very, very simple. Now, another very interesting use of CSS is to give elements a shadow, a drop shadow. This is something we're all used to doing in Photoshop mostly. And again, that was something that was very hard to do before these techniques came up with CSS. And now it's fortunately very easy. Now, the markup, the CSS code for a box shadow generator is a little bit more complex. Fortunately, there's a lot of online places where we can generate the code for us. If I go to Google and I just enter box shadow generator and I use almost any of these results, I'll go to the top one and it takes us to this site where you can see there's a little box and just a little set of controls that allow us to change the color, the opacity, the blur, and the distance of that a box shadow. So I'm going to select this one right there, and the color I'm going to make it, I'll keep it the color, reduce the opacity a bit. Once I'm done, I simply copy this code, and I'll explain what it is in just a second. Go back to my page, paste it in there. Now, the property is technically called box shadow, but you'll see here there's another version of the same thing repeated: WebKit box shadow, MOZ box shadow. WebKit and MOZ are just vendor prefixes. This is because a lot of the browsers still don't recognize a standard CSS box shadow, and they have these vendor-specific ones. For Chrome and Safari, I'm going to use WebKit. For Mozilla, I'm going to use MOZ. So if I save this and preview it, you can see now that my box shadow has been nicely added in there. The same thing happens with gradients. I'm going to just Google CSS gradient generator. And I really like the top one, this site right here. What I have is a set of sliders where I can change the color, just like I do in Photoshop, create my own gradients that look exactly how I want them, or I can select from a list of preset gradients here. I'm going to just select this one for now. And I'm going to click the copy button right here to copy all of this text. This is why these gradient generators are so nice, because we don't have to type all of this. All this code has been repeated so many times because it has different parameters, so it looks okay in different browsers and different versions of those browsers. I'm going to click copy, and I'll paste that in. You'll see it's quite a bit of code, but it's very easy to use. Save. And now my CSS has that very pretty shadow and that gradient applied to it. Keep in mind though that just because you have shadows, box shadows, gradients, and things of that nature, it doesn't necessarily make your site better, right? These are used sparingly and in a tasteful and thoughtful manner. You can very easily go overboard with these types of effects, and it's not going to make your site better. I've seen some brilliant websites that are just black and white with nothing fancy. It's just good typography, good spacing, and above all, good and useful content for the visitor. That's what makes a website very good, in my opinion. So let's add some text inside of that div. And I'm just going to style the text. Font family. We'll make it white. And font size, I'll make it 50 pixels, something quite large. Maybe text align center. It needs to be 100, maybe 150 pixels, much larger. That's more like it. Starting to look pretty nice. Now another one is text shadow. And I can again use Google. Find the text shadow generator. Much in the same way, this is the same website. And I can of course play with those values. So I will increase the blur, increase the opacity, and I'll leave it there. Again, I just go copy this code, paste it in there, and there it is. Subtle additions of text shadow, box shadow, and gradients can give our pages a almost textured 3D-like appearance. And again, there's no right or wrong way to go about it. It just depends on practice and having that eye for applying it in the right ways.